They love you.
I'm John Robbins. Yeah. 9 o'clock.
Well, this is gonna be the tricky thing.
Not for me, no. I've talked to the beginning pastoral. I was the administrator, Sarah. And I had talked to, well, maybe a couple of one of the supervisors called me.
Someone will do that.
Might have to sit around the room.
Probably a different, 9 o'clock only has to be county budget. So you just up there. Sure.
Anywhere? Whatever you like up here.
What's that?
Where's your puppy? Didn't bring him with you today? Or?
No, I didn't have any other meetings to go to. Or,
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's your home. You guys, I'm never seeing Oh, really?
A lot of things going on. I don't know why that was such a big window with a little window.
Yeah, they're working on it.
It's not like a real
And then Jason, it's set that we have to watch for Detroit. We have to hit this ordinance.
Just the way it always was. We can change it probably in the future if we need to. I don't know if there was a reason for that or not.
I'm just afraid I'll miss something. I guess so.
Oh, okay, gotcha. That's important.
There's somebody else wanting to get us in here.
It's like high risk, but it's. It's this stuff, and we start looking at, roll up around. And now it's cut to 58. Yeah, I appreciate it. That was right after.
The conference.
Yeah.
Wasn't connected.
How you doing? Good. Good deal.
Yeah. Sorry, I still did not.
Good.
Touch me.
You guys are.
Have to. You want to work when we were down here before? Yeah, I did. I was just, I touched it. Maybe it was me. I'm so there is red. And it's making me admit people. Yeah, so, yeah, that's right. Tonight? Yeah, and then look at the middle screen there. That should be a full screen. I mean, that should be that whole box. So there's something with the camera that's, yeah, look at all this, this should be the whole thing. Yeah, because remember when we were down here, it was working, because that thing was.
I saw it when she put it on.
We're good.
Okay. Now,
I think we're good.
all right, we are ready to go. It is 101, and I'd like to welcome the members of the public to what I believe is probably the first ever joint meeting of the Floyd County Board of Supervisors and Zoning Commission. We're glad you're here. You're with us in person. You're with us on the Zoom meeting, and we also have a conference call. Is that correct? Was it correct?
Yes, they can just dial in and their Zoom.
So, very briefly, our agenda is posted. There'll be ample time for county residents and anyone else at the appropriate time to ask questions or make comments about the educational presentation. That's what we're here today about. And our guest will be presenting most of that information is John Robbins, who's the senior planner at NASCOG, and we have engaged with him to help us throughout this process. So without really any further ado, I will call the meeting to order of the Board of Supervisors and ask for a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
Motion by Supervisor Jorgensen, seconded by Kiefer to approve the agenda. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. I'll yield the floor to Chairman of the Planning and Zoning Commission, Dean Jay.
Thank you, Mike. Again, this is the first time this can continue on a joint venture like this. Do I need to call a meeting to order since you called one? I guess I probably, yeah, I'd entertain. We've seen the agenda. I'll call this meeting joint venture meeting between the Planning and Zoning Commission and the Board of Supervisors. As an introduction, I want to introduce Planning and Zoning Commissioners. On my far right here is Pam Lyons, Ben Reinhouse to my immediate right, and Guy Carpenter's to my left. Allison Stout is another member on our board. She's not able to make it. She travels quite extensively throughout the Midwest, so she's not here today. Staff members we have here. Jen Solomon is our staff administrator. Jeff Sherman's not here yet. He was anticipated to be here virtually, part of planning and zoning director. So I'll yield the floor back to Mark, and we'll start this out. Again, I want to reiterate, this is an educational meeting. We're going to keep the comments from the attendees other than the Board of Supervisors and Planning and Zoning Commission to a very minimum. So we want to order.
Yes, for that, John, you have the floor.
So as Mark introduced me, I'm John Robbins. I'm a planner with NIACOG. So I'm here to help you with amending your zoning ordinance to basically revise your requirements of your zoning ordinance. And actually, there's a little pile right there. I know that's what's currently on books in the zoning ordinance as well. So I kind of anticipate this being a little bit more discussive, if you will. So items 2 and 3, I welcome like questions as we go, so we don't have to separate them. If you have a question, you just I'm also welcome feedback if something sort of draws you a little bit, you want to inquire, discuss a little bit more deeply, happy to do that as well. I'm also looking for feedback just to kind of get kind of your thoughts and those kind of things too, but obviously, I'll be doing a lot of talking for sure. But, well, I kind of envision this being very deliberate, kind of topic by topic, try to compartmentalize and simplify as best you can. It's a very complicated topic. So that said, if you do have questions as well, feel free to let them come. First thing I just kind of want to go over is just what do you have, you know? So Floyd County did a comprehensive plan in 2018, worked with NIACOG actually to draft that document. That document kind of outlines your long-term vision, future things like that. And that's your primary tool to implement that comprehensive plan is your zoning ordinance, right? And in that comprehensive plan, there's some related aspects and general policy type statements related to wind, in some cases directly, and in some cases tangentially to wind energy. So with this, I'm gonna stick with wind energy just to kind of keep it focused. The battery storage won't be as, complicated as the wind side or have as many topics to go over. But I anticipate doing that kind of at a later time. As far as just what's in your comprehensive plan, I've been kind of read through it a little bit, and just what we have on the books that is related to wind energy. I'll just list them off. I see the preserve prime farmland, encourage proper soil management practices, don't negatively impact farm operations, avoid floodplains for development, protect environmentally sensitive areas, ensure proper road maintenance of roads, so that is related to like the construction process and so forth. Placement of transmission lines that don't pose a hazard to safety. Also, just related, just the farmland itself, requiring the developer to return farmland back to its original condition after the end of the useful life of a development. You also have just a very direct statement in there that you want to encourage development of clean and renewable energy and efficiency. And then also, you also encourage recycling efforts. So at the decommission, that's related to decommissioning, removal of materials and things like that. So you do already have something on the books. That speaks to me like you're trying to achieve a balance between allowing for renewable energy and also but also addressing potential impacts from those types of developments as well. So that's kind of what you have on the books. So, and so the goal of what we would do with the zoning ordinance would be to implement some of that into the ordinance itself. As far as what you have on the books, you currently have well, basically, so I sent you a copy of your general regulations. There's some minimum requirements for large scale wind facilities. So you do have something on the books that requires what you call a conditional use permit that is reviewed by your board of adjustment. And in Iowa Code 335, that's zoning enabling legislation, if you didn't know that. That's what allows you to have zoning in the first place. Special or conditional use permits. So there's a lot of terms I may use interchangeably. I'll just let you know. Conditional use, special use, special exception. They're all the same thing, just a different term for the same thing. Different jurisdictions will use special use permit or conditional use permit or special exception permit. They're essentially all the same type of permitting process. That's the term they decided to use for that particular process. But essentially that's what you do already. Your current regulations are some very basic, has some safety standards, insurance standards, some, things like that, safety standards. And it's fairly basic. Some of them are fairly vague, where I would probably recommend some of the stuff that is more specific, like setbacks or noise or what have you. So as we kind of go through some of the different topics, I won't, our kind of our main goal today is just to kind of get a basic understanding of the various topics that are involved in considerations as we write up an ordinance, basically. So in that conditional use process, the Board of Adjustment has discretion to add conditions based on its findings in the public hearing. And a lot of those findings can be from the review by the zoning department when they write up a report, and they can make recommendations for conditions that can be included. Generally, it is advisable to put most of your minimum requirements in the ordinance itself. So it basically creates a predictable regulatory environment for both the developer and landowners and the public. So it's a little bit more understandable and it's there and easy to see. So I definitely would recommend that as we develop this, we create a more robust set of requirements. Any questions on kind of what we currently have at all? So I'm gonna try to kind of go topic by topic as we go along. The first one is just the process itself. How are you going to regulate? What are they gonna go, what are they gonna go through? One of those, is that we can also create something a little bit more, specific to this type of development. So we can modify based on existing processes. So for example, so a couple different options that we have. One is you can keep a conditional use permit process, which you kind of already do, but then we can create more, just a more robust set of minimum requirements in the ordinance itself. So that goes through Board of Adjustment. It wouldn't go through Board of Supervisors unless you would want to specify that. So that's kind of the more traditional. That's what most counties do, is a conditional use, special use type process. Another one is what we call a floating overlay zone. An overlay zone is basically you're creating a special type of district, almost like a zoning district, almost akin to like residential, commercial. But an overlay zone is you put a special district on top of the underlying zoning district. So currently you have wind farms as a conditional use in the A1 agricultural district, basically. This applies more stringent requirements on that particular type of district. So it's a floating overlay zone. One, you actually already have an overlay zone in your zoning ordinance, it's your floodplain ordinance. So that's basically like an overlay on top of the requirements of the basic district that's underneath. So if you have someone that's trying to develop in a floodplain, for example, you have additional requirements on top of the minimum requirements of that district. A floating overlay zone for renewable energy is basically applying those to wind turbines. Or, whatever you want to specify specifically for a specific purpose. The specific purpose would be for wind development, basically. That process would go through basically a rezoning process. So you've done rezonings in the past, it would be going through the Planning and Zoning Commission, you'd be taking advantage of an existing process in your zoning ordinance, basically. Goes through Planning and Zoning Commission and Board of Supervisors would make a decision. So the Planning and Zoning Commission would make a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors make the final decision. This option has become more popular in recent years. Lynn County does this, for example. So that's another option that has gained popularity. A lot of Board of Supervisors I shouldn't say a lot, at least a few throughout the state have found that because it's such a wider land use that can impact landowners, that having elected officials make the decision rather than holding the public is more suits their needs, I guess, if you will. So that's another option. That said, you can also kind of tune your process to your liking too. So you could add, like, say, additional public hearings, for example. You could, if you kept a conditional use permit, for example, you could have a wind development go through the Planning and Zoning Commission and then the Board of Adjustment, for example. So that can be, so you can basically, you can we can specify how that process and then amend it how we would like it to go based on kind of what you deem necessary based on this type, more intensive development. So those are a couple different options that different counties in the state use. Again, the more popular is the conditional use permit through the board of adjustment. The floating overlay zone is becoming more popular. Another thing that you could also consider is, well, let me start over there. One thing that you definitely should have in the order. So today we're not necessarily trying to arrive at specific requirements, just trying to kind of give you some options, things like that. I'll try to cover as many of the basic. We're trying to cover the basics as best we can, I guess. It's not going to be entirely exhaustive, so I apologize. Might feel that way. But one thing that you definitely should have in your process is a pre-application meeting. This is typically with your zoning administrator, where a developer will come in and kind of basically introduce their project, kind of go over what the general area is, some of the different, basically try to cover the different aspects that's specific to a project. That just should be in the ordinance requirement. That won't be something that the public bodies, like the P&Z commissioner, board supervisors will consider. This is, before they even file the application itself. So that should be in there. Some counties also require notification of certain entities prior to making an application, or at least at the time of application. So that can be, the FCC, the FAA, can be your conservation department, for example. That I've seen in quite a few counties, but it's not necessarily something you need in there, because a lot of those entities they're gonna have to consult with anyway. Like the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service already requires wind developers to do studies and get permitting through their entity. FAA requires it as well. The FCC requires that. So there will be some redundancy, but that's not necessarily a bad thing either. Just so you know that their purpose of that is just so you kind of know that they're doing those things. Another thing is that an ordinance will do or can do is typically there is sort of a review period or time frame that you put in the ordinance. Basically just assess that it's a complete application, that all the required elements are in that application, whether it's your FAA determinations, things like that. Basically just specifying, say it's 30 days is fairly typical. That's something that should also be in there. One option that you could consider is can require a developer to host an informational meeting in a public place somewhere in the county. And usually 30 days, some developers do that anyway already. But then you have a requirement for like posting the newspaper, all that kind of stuff, just to give the public a better opportunity to know what's going on, inform the public, that kind of thing. That's something when I was at Cerro, we basically informally did, but I think when they do their ordinance, that's something they probably will implement. So that's something I recommend, but you don't have to necessarily. I don't think a lot of counties actually have that in an ordinance, but it's something you could include. Then there's what usually you specify a review period. So have your staff or a consultant basically review whether it's meeting requirements, write a report to your zoning commission or board of adjustment, whatever it is. To give yourself enough time to actually be able to review it, because it can be quite work intensive. So having a reasonable time such as like 30 to 90 days is not atypical in an ordinance. That's something I definitely would recommend having specific in your ordinance. And then also specify, so we're basically specifying the process in the ordinance itself as well.
Yeah, John, you mentioned the possibility of having the developer conduct a public meeting
Yes.
during is that during the pre-app process? Or are you suggesting that comes after that?
It can come after they file an application, so it can come during the review period. I would definitely recommend that it's at least a certain time frame before the first formal public hearing, usually like 30 days. So before it actually is heard by the Planning and Zoning Commission, or Board of Adjustment, or Board of Supervisors, whatever we specify. That way, it's another layer of getting the word out there, because it's, you can't send a mailer to every person in the county, right? That would be cost prohibitive for the county, responsible use of taxpayer funds, that kind of thing. So, it's just another element that can get the public information out there, give the people an opportunity to just know what's going on, essentially.
And then depending on what would be in the ordinance, what would be included in that public meeting?
So you would have, typically the, developer would have their various staff on hand that can address questions from the public. So usually they'll have their environmental people, their site development people, noise people, all that kind of stuff. So they can actually just, when we went through that process with NextEra Energy, we did a redevelopment of the wind farm south of Clear Lake. They hosted that's something they just typically do themselves. They hosted basically an informational open house, more or less, that was at the historic park actually in Mason City. They had a bunch of posters of like site plan, environmental information, noise information, shadow flicker information, et cetera, and just kind of explain what goes all into the development of the project, tell them about the project, how many turbines are in there, how many megawatts, all that kind of stuff. So they just allows the public to kind of come in and ask them various questions. So as far as process then, you go through formal public hearings, and then, you'll make, by that time, usually staff, or if you hire a consultant to help you with it, because it's obviously labor intensive. They'll kind of determine whether minimum requirements are met. You can discuss some of the more gray areas, impacts to particular properties or what have you, and specify maybe additional findings such as, where you may add additional requirements such as, buffering and things like that. We'll get into that a little bit later here, but, and then ultimately make a formal decision, whether there's an approval or a denial. And generally, after the initial permitting process or rezoning process, whatever you ultimately decide upon with an amendment, usually there's other, follow-up permitting, such as building permits, to verify that they're still building as they proposed and was approved by that initial conditional use permit process or rezoning process, whatever you choose. Floodplain permits, they'll be going through a road use agreement with your county engineer, various things like that. So some of that will be subsequent to this initial approval process, or considering the development as a whole, essentially. So that's kind of generally the process stuff that would be included in the ordinance itself. So just pause if you do have any further questions.
John,
Yes.
do you have, it seems an awful lot of stuff here. Do you have a timeline made out already on how long each process would be or dates or whatever? I mean,
So today, we're not specifying exactly how long those will be, we're just introducing the concepts. So this is ultimately for their benefit. As we develop a draft for this, what actually is gonna be in the ordinance, this will ultimately, I'll get feedback from commission members and the supervisors. That'll be ultimately their decision on how, what they want to say, essentially. So we don't have specific answers today. We're not, some things are almost like a definite, but a lot of things like setbacks, we're not trying to arrive at an answer today. So hopefully that helps. All right. So kind of the next thing is, generally, I also recommend you just list what is required in an application. What do they have to submit? So I'll just kind of list on some common things that are included, or can be included depending on kind of the requirements set. First thing first is a completed application. So they actually have a form they fill out, need a complete application. Also a required filing fee, and you guys will be able to set what that is. Currently you have that at $500 per turbine, essentially for large scale, commercial scale turbines. Generally, there's going to be a narrative that kind of addresses all the different requirements, explains the capacity of their development, those kind of things. That kind of address all the different requirements as they're going to be listed out in your ordinance. Generally, there's going to be site plans, so that illustrate setbacks and where the transmission lines are and the locations of the turbines and substations, net towers, potentially battery storage facilities could be included with the development. Generally, I did send you, I believe Jeff forwarded on, there was an example site plans from, I just drew from our Sarasota County redevelopment, because they were quite good site plans and examples. So, the list setbacks from residences, setbacks from property lines, setbacks from other things that may need to be addressed as well. So there's that. Generally should require proof of agreement with landowners. So that can be done in various ways, whether they send you a copy of the agreements themselves. Oftentimes it might be maybe a list of the properties with signatures from the property owners, verifying that they are participating in the development and giving leases to the particular company. And that should be for not just turbine locations, but also substation locations, any potential laydown yards for preparing the construction process, substations, transmission line locations, et cetera, basically anything that's included with the development that's infrastructure. If they're crossing someone's property, they should have permission, essentially, right? Another thing you may consider is requiring them to give you a list of property owners of where you're going to send direct mailers to, notifying property owners of public hearings and so forth. And the county can consider, what's fairly typical for like a typical conditional use permit, like a junkyard, that's a little bit more isolated geographically speaking. A lot of times it's like within 500 feet or adjacent property owners. Really, under state law, there is no requirement besides the newspaper notification for a conditional use. That's what's typical. Most counties at least do adjacent. A lot will follow the law of for rezonings. If it's a rezoning, it's at least 500 feet under Iowa Code 335. But with wind turbines, since they're so geographically intensive, as in they take up a lot of space, some counties require notification, like direct mailers within Sarasota County. We did half mile by practice, not by ordinance, but by practice. That was we did that because we felt that was necessary. Some counties like Cassuth County has it in their ordinance that within a mile of the project area. So, that, putting that list of property owners is fairly labor intensive, so basically just make the developer do it.
Yeah, we had something similar to that in a little different situation. It's the master matrix
Sure.
regarding separated distance from livestock confinements, where Floyd County has passed a requiring that people within a certain distance of that be notified if there are any change. Just a question for Jeff. Currently, we notify people within 500 feet of wind tank, right?
Yeah, so that's something to consider, like how far you want to go out.
Yes.
And we do that with the conditional uses.
Just a quick question. If anyone that's listening online, can you hear us? If not, just let us know. We're just checking. And then a question for Ottercar. Is it possible to put that site map that is in our packet on this screen so it can be seen? Any of the materials that John talks about, is that possible or not?
We'd have to share the screen, and I think, I don't know if I can share the screen or if Jason would have to share the screen since it's his.
Okay. Well, we're looking at some of these things that John's referring to. It's a lot easier to see and then follow along, but maybe we'll work on that.
But feel free to post it like on your website too, if people want to review those.
Okay. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, let's see, so as far, property owners, just something to consider how far out, I would generally recommend like half mile, maybe a mile, if reasonable, just because, you know, visibly, just the area, that the whole project area is fairly wide, wide reaching. Another common thing, we'll talk about the specifics of what it is a little bit later here, but having a decommissioning plan at the end of the useful life of a wind farm. So whether that's 30 years, 50 years, what are they gonna do to remove the infrastructure? A certificate of liability insurance for that either with the application or at least prior to being a zoning permit being issued. Not every county even has insurance requirements because liability is generally decided by the court. The purpose of even requiring a certificate of insurance is just to see that they actually have something in place. Just in, you know, in the event there is a dispute, that they have liability insurance, more or less. The county will ultimately decide, you know, insurance matters. Another thing that definitely is recommended, is requiring proof of, financial security. What that means is they need to have some sort of financial instrument in place, whether that is a performance bond, an escrow account, check that you give the county, whatever have you, certified letter, I forget what that's called. Some sort of financial security that basically protects landowners in the event the company goes out of business, there's abandonment of the development. So, if there's no like actual entity to take care of that decommissioning, that the county has funds to do that on behalf of it, to protect landowners, basically. Yeah,
That's from development through decommissioning or just.
that would be basically, you know, and if it's abandoned, you know, no one's there to operate it. There's no actual company, you know, that they sell it or they go bankrupt or something like that. In the event that there's no one to take that over, that there's actual money to
I just didn't know,
cover that, yeah.
it wouldn't be the first time for a construction project to get halted in the middle of it.
Yeah, and it could be that too. Yeah, that's another possibility, I guess, yeah, now that you bring it up. Okay. So, yeah, if like they go belly up in the middle of building it, then they can be removed, you have that money in place in advance, basically. Another thing, is, the term, so FAA has certain, requirements, they need to get a what they call a determination of no hazard. That's basically a permit saying that, from the FAA, you'll hear the term CFR 7460. saying it's not a hazard. Them building those turbines are not a hazard to commercial air traffic, more or less. FAA regulates commercial airports, in particular. So whether they include at a very minimum, requiring a proof that they're applying for it. The zoning administrator can verify it later, at a later time, before they issue a zoning permit. But before, shovel goes into the ground, then you have FAA approvals essentially. So it's kind of a redundant requirement because it's a federal requirement. They have to have those before they can build. Otherwise, they're gonna get in deep trouble with the federal government. So, that's just kind of a redundant requirement, just to make sure, they have those approvals or are in the process of that, yeah.
Those surety bonds you mentioned, do they need to be or should be approved by the Board of Supervisors?
The financial security?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, I would also recommend having it approved by your county attorney. Make sure it's sufficient in their mind. And generally, well, I'll kind of bring it up, we can talk about it now, but you can set the amount, so usually it's like a percentage of the amount of the materials or something like that. Usually like 150% or something like that. So you can set those amounts in the ordinance, exactly what they're set. I don't know the exact terminology offhand, but we'll make sure that's right when we write it up. But yeah, have your county attorney kind of sign off on it to make sure it's satisfactory for what the requirement will be. Another thing is the FCC, Federal Communications Commission, also requires wind developers to basically, they call them beam signal studies, to make sure the turbines aren't in beam paths or going to interfere with radio traffic. So again, they could have the approval already, or they can show proof that they're in the process. Generally, I would give that allowance, that they don't necessarily have to have that before application. But before you issue a zoning permit, they need to have that in place. So before a shovel goes in the ground again. So another thing that you could require, depending on how you decide to regulate, is require them to have a third-party acoustical study for decibel levels completed. And we'll go into noise a little bit here later too. Another one you can also do is a third-party shadow flicker study as well, and a mitigation plan for that potentially. Again, depending on how you decide to regulate. It's also fairly common to require just manufacturer details, equipment, diagrams, things like that to accompany an application. Another one is emergency action plan, how are they going to handle fires, emergency situations, things like that. That's not necessarily exhaustive list of what, you would also leave yourself some leeway, like anything as requested by the zoning administrator, maybe there may be situations where you want further detail on various stuff. Yeah, we'll go into some of that with the same stuff. So that's a lot of stuff.
Another question, have you ever worked with any ordinances that addressed highly productive land?
That's an interesting one. I did have a little bit towards the end I was going to go over. Generally, so I don't get as concerned, this is just the first one, I don't get as concerned about that for wind turbines, because generally for an individual wind turbine and a service road takes up less than an acre. Generally, you're gonna find more farmland stay out of production just from farmers building houses. To be honest, so if you get that a little, if you get that, I guess scrupulous with it, you also should probably start considering about, like it's a balance, I suppose. If you want.
Could there be on a scale of if the land averages higher than a certain established CSR, they are not permitted to go on that land, maybe?
You could consider that. I generally don't recommend basing on CSR just because, the minimal amount that the wind turbine does take of land. But that would be up to you guys if you actually want that. We could do a little, we have a lot of fun in this regard, to say the least in Iowa. So that could be pretty prohibitive. With wind developments, I think it's a different conversation with solar. Because that's a little bit more dense, if you will, and will take up more land that was in agricultural production potentially. We'll have that conversation when we start thinking about your solar ordinance. But it's something you can consider, but I don't generally recommend it. Just because it's fairly minimal compared to some other types of things that take farmland out of production.
John, what about DNR or environmental safety?
We'll get into that. Try to keep it on topic if we can, but we just efficient as best we can. So the next thing is just generally setbacks. Generally, ordinance has various types of setbacks. What is a setback? Setback is the distance from where the turbine is to measure the closest distance to a particular whatever. And then generally it's setbacks are your primary tool for zoning, for wind developments and a lot of other things. So there's various types of setbacks. What's typical in a wind ordinance, generally you're gonna have a setback requirement from non-participating property lines, and we'll define that in the ordinance. What is a non-participating property line? Basically someone that doesn't have an agreement with the developer. From public road or private road right of way, from railroad right of way, and utility lines. The most typical is usually 110% of the height of the turbine. And how do we measure height? It's going to be to the tip of the blade at its highest point of its rotation. That'll be, I think that's already defined in the ordinance, if I recall. So the most typical in ordinance is 110 to 120%. I have seen a couple different ordinances in the state that have done just higher percentages as a means to kind of regulate density a little bit, kind of get them separated further, although wind resources will naturally do that too. Just because you need to, if you're trying to be efficient, you just want to spread them out a little bit more anyway, so you're not interfering with each other's wind resources as they're turning. But I have seen, like Monona County, for example, has a requirement that from like right away, non-participating property lines of 200% of the height. So that's something that to consider as well. Another common setback type that I'd also recommend having is a setback from a turbine to nearest house or occupied buildings, like commercial buildings, hospitals, schools, et cetera, or residential districts or zoned residential districts. Those are typically, and you probably saw in materials, the most common is about 1,000 feet to 1,250 feet. Though in recent years, some counties have been doing larger distances. There was one article or a white paper that was in your packet and it was from the Center for Rural Affairs, has really some really good maps that kind of demonstrate the impacts of setbacks, how restrictive they can be. And they kind of have an example from a Nebraska county that kind of shows, so all those dots on there. I apologize for the audience that you can't see this, but they have like, I believe, I can't remember exactly what they illustrate, but it's greater distances, and they have little dots so where those dots are, where turbines basically would meet setback requirements from residents essentially. And so most typical is 1,000 to 1,250 feet. Once you start getting to approximately 1,500 feet from a resident, that's where it starts becoming challenging for a developer to make an economically feasible development. That would make even, you know, doing a wind farm feasible essentially. So it starts to get challenging around those distances, just based on how houses are spread out, various other requirements they're gonna have to meet. Another type of setback you may consider, or a setback from conservation areas and public parks, so this kind of addresses the question that we just had not too long ago. You know, I've seen, it's more common in like Nebraska to have those types of setback requirements, but some counties now do have those. I've seen 600 feet to approximately 1,250 feet, it's fairly common. 1,250 feet is about a quarter mile. Also, you may consider distances from incorporated city limits. Purpose of that is, you know, cities expand, they annex land, so they can, you know, potentially consider their own growth. So that's another thing to consider. I don't know how common that is in Iowa counties, but something to consider. Then there's some other minor type ones that aren't very common, but some county here or there may have like requirements from distance from like an animal confined feeding operation. There's a couple I've seen that have setbacks from public drainage district right away or from drainage tile, like say 100 feet from the center line of the drainage tile. I don't know if that's necessary because generally there's some state law, we'll look at this a little bit more as well, that cover impacts to public drainage infrastructure and drainage tile that they're gonna have to meet anyway from the state level. But some county, I believe Cassuth County has some setbacks on that. So generally, like, you know, setbacks is kind of your main tool to address potential impacts from things like noise, shadow flicker, density, impacts to birds and wildlife, things like that. But it is also common. Yes, sorry.
Did they ever make a distinction between a home and a building? Like a machine shed or something?
Typically, I've never seen from accessory buildings requirements. You know, typically they're occupied, but then you also have, you know, your non-participating property line setbacks that also can kind of address that as well. So that's probably the most common way to do that. So I haven't seen that specifically from like a machine shed or just a general structure, you know. Other thing that is also fairly typical in ordinances is the allowance for property owners to do a setback waiver agreement with the developer. So if they're okay with having, you know, a wind turbine closer to their home or from their property line, that they can provide an agreement or proof of agreement to allow for that closer setback. So that gives you some leeway as well from the strict setbacks you may set. So that's pretty common. Questions on setbacks, types of setbacks? Okay. So then there's some just miscellaneous ones that can't really group into their own little topic, I guess. Some counties will regulate maximum height, although that's relatively uncommon because generally those are addressed by setback requirements. You'll have usually enough setback that address max height, but I have seen like Winona County has like a max height of 600 feet, for example. So that's something also to consider. Another requirement, fairly common requirement, although it kind of is wide ranging county to county, is what we call minimum ground clearance. And that's kind of the lowest point of the blade as it turns. So generally, I think the purpose of that is just so, you know, you're not clipping the top of the combine or something like that. But those are widely diverging, but they generally fall in the 25 foot to 40 foot range, I'd say is the most common. But I've seen as low as 12 foot from Boone County. from the ground, and sometimes they're as high as like 75 foot. That might be more that might be more common though, of what an actual turbine clearance would be anyway. So something to consider. Probably good to just have something at least minimally high enough, just, they can always be higher, but you know, you have a minimum at least, so it's not within like a combine or something like that. Generally, it's, generally have something regulating paint color, so generally white, you know, something that's, you know, you don't have a hot pink, turbine in the middle of a field, would be a little distracting, right? And generally, it's pretty common to also not allow for like advertising, besides maybe like GE or something on top, you know, the manufacturer name on the side of the turbine. We kind of already went over the requirement for financial security. I don't have anything additional because we kind of chatted about that. Another thing that you absolutely should have in your ordinance is the requirements of a road use agreement with the county engineer. So you don't necessarily need to list every little requirement that would be in that agreement in the zoning ordinance, because it can be covered in the agreement. Generally, some things that are really in that agreement are specified construction routes for when they're building the turbines. Something I would say is I wouldn't even play around with them proposing the routes themselves, just have it be at the discretion of the engineer. He says where you travel, basically. Not that they can't have a back and forth on what's the most advantageous or economical, but what roads are gonna be best for hauling, because these are pretty large pieces of, you know, infrastructure that are coming. When it comes to wind developers, but that's gonna be very common, but just have it be at the decision of the engineer, what he says goes essentially, right? Another thing that you're gonna wanna require in that and maybe you put this in your zoning ordinance, but require a pre-construction assessment of road conditions along those construction routes. Basically what they do is they'll hire a company go on a truck with a camera and we'll take a video of the current conditions of the road. So you know exactly what the conditions are of that road are. Some intersections may require some modifications for the wider turning radius. When you have like a big base for a turbine, you know, it's gonna take a wider turn, so they may need to modify that. That'll all be in your agreement, basically, with the county engineer. So that's pretty common, and you're gonna require them to fix whatever they break, essentially, right? Or in some cases, they'll improve it because it might have been in rough shape before and then they broke it with their heavy trucks and they fix it. That's pretty common. So that should all be in your road use agreement with the county engineer. And that doesn't have to be, you know, with the application. That'll be kind of subsequent to the application for like a special use permit or rezoning, whatever we decide. So that, yeah, that's definitely something that should be in there. Another thing that should be addressed, or I know you have public drainage districts in your county. And obviously there's drainage tile that farmers use, right? There's state law that covers, and Gloria will be probably more knowledgeable on those procedures. You probably have established I'm gonna ask you, do you have established procedures for impacts to drainage districts?
No, we have a company that we work with, Bolton and Mink, that is going to be, the Board of Supervisors can work with them where they've talked about hiring someone to.
Okay, so you basically take advantage of the state procedures, basically, that is the state law. Is that 468?
468 is drainage, but those specifications are, the Iowa Drainage Association has come up with some draft agreements. And we have those, and it's, you know, plug
Iowa
in.
Drainage Association?
Iowa Drainage Association, yeah.
Okay. How many
Drainage District
consultants?
Association.
But essentially, you know, in the state law, it requires them to repair any, and generally they should get an assessment before they impact any, you know, before this construction ever takes place, before they start costing farmers or your drainage districts a bunch of money. they gotta make sure, they'll probably do a GIS agreement with your GIS department, or wherever that's housed, so they can kind of have a general idea of where those drainage, at least the public drainage infrastructure is. They'll probably do pre-assessments anyway. But basically, you're gonna wanna have a requirement that says they're responsible for repairing or rerouting any drainage infrastructure that can damage. Simple as that.
Over public?
Yeah, yeah. A lot of times that'll be in the private agreements they have with the landowners anyway. Sometimes, they may need to get, I don't know what you call them here, but work in the right of way permits from your county engineer, so sometimes maybe they'll go through, go along, a public road, 310th Street, whatever it is, or, cross a road, they'll have to cross the road eventually. Same with the transmission lines for that matter, but, they'll have to have assessments on whether they're gonna potentially impact, drainage infrastructure, particularly public drainage infrastructure. And generally, I don't know that setbacks from a drainage tile is necessary in an ordinance. This is just because, you know, this is heavy infrastructure that needs to be a little bit of ways from a drainage tile anyway, so, because there's gonna be some compaction from the weight of the turbine anyway, so. I don't know if it's necessary to actually put it in the ordinance, but, it's something you can consider if you're supposed to, but, either way, they need to pay for any damage it costs.
For how long a period?
Well, usually it's gonna be, well, I guess it'd just be perpetual, but the biggest concern would be during construction, because there shouldn't really be any changes during the life of the farm once it's installed, and construction's done. Unless they need to replace, tile or something, so I don't know if they have to replace like a turbine blade and bring in a crane and crush, a lot of that's already covered in, their private agreements too. It never hurts, you could always ask one of the developers how they handle that too. Yeah.
What about an emergency response plan?
Yeah, we'll talk about that. Yeah, but yeah, I definitely recommend having that as well as a, I call it an emergency action plan, but emergency response plan could also be the terminology we use in the ordinance. But yes, I would definitely recommend that. We'll get to that for sure. Yeah.
Have you seen it where, tile gets crushed on a gravel road, packs water up on the farm? Are there big damages on the cropland that results from that?
So generally, anything that's in the right of way, oh yeah, they'll have to, that'd be part of your road use agreement.
They would go back into and then.
Yeah, I'd say, yeah,
offset the crop
if they're damaging, tile infrastructure, they need to, that should be in your order, that's part of this, yes, that would be their responsibility. Especially if it's on another road right away. Crop damages are usually gonna be covered in private agreements, so, that's hard to regulate from a county side, enforcing the crop damage. Okay. All right, the fun topic, noise. Turbines do make some noise. Generally, noise originates from at least two places. One is just the movement of the wind through blades as they turn. That's where you get that whoosh sound, the kind of sound. And also mechanical parts. So if you hear screeching, that means maintenance is probably necessary on a turbine. Newer models, and I think the developers in here can tell you, newer models have, you know, have better designed blades that are quieter, and newer models that tend to be quieter. So the newer the wind farm, generally it's quiet. Generally, your biggest weapon to kind of combat the impact of noise is setbacks. So we kind of addressed the different types of that, but different setbacks, you know, so one of the purposes of those is to get distance between, you know, like a nearest residence or residential district. So the farther away, like typically, right? Not all counties regulate the noise itself. They just have the setback requirements, because that's what, that's kind of the best tool, if you will. But generally, if you wanna have sort of a second layer of protection, if you will, you could, some counties do regulate noise, and you can require, regulate, typically, you know, it's audible sound measured in decibels, right? In your packet, there was sort of a diagram of, kind of different noise levels. I believe I know that here. One second. Generally, what is the most common, if I don't make a copy of this, about this. So generally, that was from an EPA, sort of, document from the seventies or eighties that, generally just kind of gives you levels of comparable types of noises at those decibel ranges. So generally like 70 decibels, they say that's a moderate level of sound. The vacuum cleaner, that's about 10 foot away, is at 70 decibels. 60 decibels, a passenger car at 65 miles an hour when you're 25 feet away from it. 60 decibels is like a large store air conditioning unit when you're 20 feet away from it. So generally, the range, then you start getting kind of the quiet ranges, like light auto traffic, 100 feet away is 50 decibels. 45 decibels is kind of just like a residential area, or excuse me, a rural residential area with not really any activity going on. So generally, what's common, if you do have sound requirements, is to have, say, it's not gonna be any louder on average than 50, 55 decibels. And that's usually measured from the turbine itself to the closest residence. It's not gonna be on average louder. I mean, to be realistic, you know, there might be periods where it may be louder. But on average, you know, it's not gonna be louder than that, those levels. The way you kind of regulate that, is if you're gonna have that, you can have a pre-application study conducted by a third party. So I had that listed in the application, what you may require, with the application itself. Basically, they have a third party, they make certain assumptions. Usually they're making an assumption that it's quote unquote max conditions, so the highest wind levels you would typically get in that area, with no obstruction, so trees in the way, you know, just sound coming right at you, basically. So the way you verify it is you have them submit the study, and they'll have like a map. So with your materials, there's an example, I believe Jeff forwarded that on to you, of an actual sound study the NextEra Wind conducted, for the Saratoga County Wind Farm redevelopment. So on there's a bunch of wavy lines on a map. And then it's like generally, that's how loud it would be from that turbine to that point on the map, essentially. So that kind of would be, you have them submit that with application essentially. One thing I haven't seen in Iowa, but I believe is part of state code in Minnesota, is you could potentially require a post application study, say 1 year after construction, so they can actually measure actual conditions. And then have a potentially mitigation if, you know, they're not achieving the sound that they said they were gonna achieve when it was approved. So I haven't seen that in Iowa, but that is something that you could consider implementing, if you want to regulate the sound.
So who does that study? Is it an engineering firm or something?
Oh, basically, yeah, they'd hire an engineering firm to do an acoustical study, to measure that.
Who hires the engineering firm?
The development, typically. So you put it on, basically, you're gonna put all that expense on the developer, so it doesn't cost the county.
Could the county choose the engineering firm?
I believe you could if you want. I've never seen a county do that, but usually, you kind of place that responsibility on the developer, but, that'd be a good question for Todd as well. Just get his feedback on implementing, your selections potentially, but if we could consider trying to do that maybe. And sometimes, so if like there is, some issues potentially, say you do require a post sound study, you could potentially have maybe a complaint resolutions section, where they do ad hoc sort of measurements with a microphone or whatever on a property. And maybe have certain mitigation members, for that particular property, such as requiring them to install vegetative buffers, line of trees to basically mitigate sound or something like that. That's something you could also consider. And then also, you could potentially allow noise waivers as well, similar to a setback waiver if a property owner is okay with a little bit louder noise. Let them have an agreement. Sometimes I would probably recommend a cap on how loud you would allow for, just for any future property owners, because, these are gonna be there for a long time. So that's another possibility, so. That's generally noise. Shadow flicker. So, what do we mean by shadow flicker? Shadow flicker is the effect of the moving blade as it casts its shadow across the property, usually through like a narrow opening, like a window, is where it's going to be the most impactful. And so generally shadow flicker is measured in hours per year. So it's spread across, a year. How long a shadow flicker may impact a particular property, usually no more than 10 minutes a day. But generally industry accepted standard is no more than 30 hours per year. So certain parts of the year, shadow flicker won't affect the property at all, a closer property. But at other times it may be, maybe 7 minutes, 8 minutes a day. So that's a possibility. Generally I would recommend going with, I've never seen anything besides 30 hours per year, other than Worth County, which is just 0 hours per year. That's just what they decided. And again, primary tool for shadow flicker is setbacks. So farther away, the less likely it's going to impact a particular property. And so, yeah.
If you set a time period for shadow flicker, is that like an occupied structure?
Correct.
Because, if you have 160 acres next to you, you're obviously gonna have a lot more.
Right, yeah, usually you're not gonna care if it's, the shadows being cast across your farm field usually.
Okay, so it's,
Yeah, the more annoyance is when it's going through like a, like if you're in the
so
window of
you
your
can
house.
word that so it's.
Yeah, and-
Or whatever it may be.
Yeah, so usually occupied building, usually from an occupied building or residential district or house, essentially, that is where you regulate it from. So the closest distance from the turbine to the house or whatever structure that is. So typically that's from, house occupied structure. 30 hours per year is almost 100% of what counties do. So I think I've only seen one exception to that. Again, this is another thing where you require a pre-application study, like certain assumptions in that study. No obstruction, so there's no like vegetative trees in the way. It's the long, max conditions, so to speak. They'll outline the methods they use in the study. And then usually they'll have like some sort of mitigation plan. It's here in Gordo County. That mitigation was, working with property owners that decided to have automated blinds that close. At the time, shadow flicker might impact their house. Another method might be, again, vegetation or something like that. Vegetation might not be an immediate alleviation to a potential annoyance issue with shadow flicker. Because trees have to grow. So, a few years down the line, require them to maintain it, that kind of thing, but, in the future, it'll help mitigate those potential impacts as well. So decommissioning, what do they do when, the turbines are done with their quote unquote useful life, done generating electricity essentially? So you want to require a decommissioning plan with the application. What are they gonna do at the end of the life? So in your requirements, you'll want, it's typical you'll have a requirement of how deep underground infrastructure has to be removed. So typical is 4 foot underground. So, that's foundations, transmission infrastructure, anything underground, that's part of the infrastructure. I've seen as deep as 6 foot. Another thing is typically a little list of time frame they have to remove when it's done. Essentially, usually about 6 months or 180 days. Another thing that's typically in there is what are they going to do with all the materials? So your comprehensive plan wants to encourage recycling. Typically, nowadays, most materials do get recycled. Like concrete is crushed for like aggregate. Steel parts or motor parts are recycled. The real tough one still is wind turbine blades, which are made of fiberglass, and the industry is still kind of working on how to recycle those at scale. Some of the older wind farms, like the Saragordo County wind farm, they did get cut up in landfill. So, hopefully, in the future, that'll be addressed, but, right now, I know the industry's working on it.
Question,
Yes,
is there anything in the, all of the turbine transformers that stand beside the turbines or that the EPA would be concerned about? Disposal of?
that one I don't know, offhand. I'm sure there's certainly things like with like lubricants. Yeah, no, I just don't know the answer offhand. I'd have to research that. But if actually, so I was telling Mark kind of before we started, I'm in talks with Floyd Energy to kind of do a presentation Q&A with you. If you're interested in that, maybe we can set up a workshop in early next year. Those kind of questions would be probably better source for the answer to those kind of things.
Have you ever witnessed a decommissioning that didn't occur? They had the plan and they went out of business and
I've never personally seen it.
like the windmills are still there, they haven't done anything with
Yeah,
them.
and that's why you have financial security though. So then if there isn't an entity that you can enforce to remove, county just will hire someone to do it, and you have that funding in place. That's why you have usually a financial security requirement. But I've never seen. Again, yeah, you kind of alluded to it, but I had another note is have financial security requirements in place so you don't have that situation. At least there's, a solution to address it. That's kind of decommissioning. Safety requirements. So you do have some of these already in your ordinance, but yeah, obviously safety is one of the most important factors. One thing you'll wanna have in your ordinance is you need to keep an up-to-date contact with your zoning office, so if there is ever an issue that if someone will call or mail, you need to keep that on file with the county. It's also pretty much universal that, counties require that there is a contact assigned by each turbine that has emergency contact information, so if there's like fire, you can call the company, 911, and all that sort of stuff. So it's on site. All ladders and access points need to be locked, I think that's in the ordinance now. So another thing is FAA usually will require lighting, so your red lights that flash. I haven't seen it in any ordinances to date, but they have new technology, it's called aircraft detection lighting systems. So basically they have like technology that will, detect when a plane's coming within a certain distance from turbines. So those lights won't actually come on until they're within that distance, so it'll just be temporary. I actually am quite a fan of implementing that, so if that's something you want to consider, you can put that in your ordinance. The only time, you basically could have lighting as required by the FAA, and if they don't wanna have aviation detection lighting systems in place, they need to show you why the FAA won't approve it. So you can't obviously supersede the FAA locally on those requirements, but you can have in your ordinance where you have to show that they can get those approvals from the FAA. So that's a newer technology, I just haven't seen it in any ordinances as of yet.
What's the name of it again, John?
Aircraft detection lighting systems or aviation detection lighting systems. I don't know a ton about it yet, but I'm kind of a fan of that type of requirement for an ordinance personally.
I am personal friends with the manager of the airport, Bill Kyle, and he's already expressed concern about that.
Aviation detection lighting systems?
Yeah, he talks about, how that doesn't always, the
Okay.
planes don't have that, and so.
I
This
see.
is one thing that was just brought to our attention.
Yeah, no, if you could give me his contact, I'd love to talk with him.
All right, we'll do it.
Yep, I always worked well with David Sims with Mason City Municipal Airport. Basically, if he made a recommendation, I would say that's a condition we should have, not a special use permit. That was a term I used, special use permit, supposed to condition this, but maybe there's reasons why you wouldn't have that requirement. I just have, it's honestly wind developers that educate me on that, even existing for one, so. So it's something to consider, so we can talk about that as we go through the process. Another one that can also, is in some ordinances, is just having like warning signage for potential like ice throw from turning turbines. Typically, your setbacks are gonna address that anyway. It's my understanding, ice throw really doesn't go beyond the height of the tower. And when I say height, that maximum distance of the rotation of the rotor, or the blade or whatever. And so, Dennis, you already kind of brought this up, require an emergency response or action plan to accompany the application, so it will address your emergency procedures in case of fire, warning system, like what tech are they using, contact information, fire procedures, icing, their response plans, all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I think that should accompany an application too, or yeah, an application to the ordinance. Another one I like is, basically require, all transmission lines to be underground. That addresses a lot of the safety concerns for electrical transmission, or substation have fits in, that kind of thing. Also, I already brought this up, requirement to have a 911 sign or an address, so there's something that you can refer to, and then make, the cost of the sign at the expense of the developer. So that's kind of this most safety stuff, I don't know. Okay. so I guess, so Dennis, you kind of already kind of brought this up, impact to agricultural and operations. Generally, a wind turbine takes up along with the service road, on average, less than an acre of farmland. I typically, like, just general development in a year's time will be comparable, like people wanting to build houses and things like that, takes up a lot of farmland too. Kind of over my years as a zoning administrator, Surrey County, I think, like, we saw a lot more farmland getting taken out of development from just regular building than wind turbines that we had in the county. So generally, I don't recommend, having a requirement on, max CRP, as a certain CRP level, but it is something you can consider, I suppose. Another thing is just environmental factors. Don't allow them to build in a floodplain. That's a big one. And then typically, so the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service does require developers to do pretty extensive studies on impacts to birds and bats. Obviously, that's one impact a turbine can have is killing flying birds and mammals. So that's one reason you would have setbacks from a conservation area, a wildlife management area, or a public park, to try to minimize some of that. It's been shown, having setbacks has been shown to minimize some of that impact. No solution is perfect, but that's kind of your main weapon to address that beyond whatever the U.S. Fish and Wildlife and Iowa DNR would impose. So I guess that's kind of what I have as far as just kind of the general stuff. I know that's a lot to digest. So kind of open it up to the supervisors and commission if they have any questions or something like that.
Yeah, the wildlife that you just brought up, is there is there might be a DNR question, is there setbacks for eagles nests?
Yeah, actually, so it's kind of funny because when I was a zoning administrator in Cerro, I reviewed a grass airstrip. It was for crop dusting operations. A company out of Wellsburg wanted to do in Cerro County to serve some of their customers up here. And we were about a week from the public hearing for the Board of Adjustment to consider the permit. And we get a call from one of the neighbors. He's like, "Hey, are you aware of this eagle's nest? It's about 1,500 feet away from the end of the runway." I'm like, son of a buck, So it's like, what do we even do for eagles, right? Eagles are officially on the endangered species list, but there is special regulations still for eagles specifically. And so I called around and found eagle, I had an eagle guy, I guess, if I can't even remember his name, but I think he was out of Tonka, I want to say, or maybe somewhere out in Illinois, but essentially they have eagle disturbance permits or reviews, so they can, if there is an eagle's nest nearby, the U.S. Fish and whether it's developer or any noisy use, if you will, like beer pumpers or whatever, they can assess whether it's gonna disturb an eagle, and if it is, maybe they can't build there, if it's too noisy, and will disturb them. There's also what's called removal permits, so they can actually, outside of mating season, have a nest removed to an alternative location, and as a sort of as a habit or humane way to, because typically, an eagle will probably just go back to where they're nesting. If their nest is no longer there, they'll probably go somewhere else. So there is some regulation, U.S. Fish and Wildlife stuff, that's generally covered under federal type requirements.
Okay.
Actually, I have a letter from the Iowa DNR. They suggest 5 miles setback.
5 miles, okay. If you want to submit that to the county, that'd be fine, then we can consider it.
How is
comments or questions from the board or the zoning commission?
And then if you do have more questions, I mean, obviously it's a lot to digest, you know, submit them to Jeff, or even submit them to me. I do my best to try to get through those, we'll have quite a amount of time, obviously.
Seems like the crucial thing is the setbacks.
I think that's probably your biggest tool, yeah.
Currently, we have 115.
Percent of the height.
Yeah.
115%.
So that's not enough.
I'd say from a residence, it's probably, I mean, that's pretty typical from like a non-participating property line or utility lines, yeah. So we can reuse that amount if needed, or from like having a setback from a non-participating property line or utility line, et cetera, et cetera. But then have a specific setback requirement from like a dwelling and occupied building for sure. We don't have those answers today, obviously, but some of the things to think about as we kind of develop the draft over the next few months.
But I see that as one items on residents.
Yeah, and as we kind of get a draft, I'll kind of ask for feedback from you guys, what you think of what we end up drafting. I'll try to, you know, as we kind of actually get words on a page, we'll get feedback from you, and it'll be a dynamic process, so even if we have, the planning and zoning commission will kind of review the draft, make recommendations or changes. We'll take some of those and put it in the draft. I mean, I am the holder, obviously, people have different opinions on what's appropriate. And then when the supervisors get it, they'll have the opportunity to amend as well, so it'll be a fairly dynamic process.
Yesterday, I had the opportunity to drive a piece of equipment from my place clear to Hampton, and I was driving right through that new development over there, and I noticed that, and they have no zoning in Chickasaw County. But I just was noticing that it seemed like the turbines there, their setbacks were a long ways apart. I mean, I was trying to find a farmstead where it would have been under, I would say close to half a mile from that.
They might have a separate ordinance too for when specifically, so like my home county, Delaware County, they didn't have zoning when I was younger, but they recently adopted zoning just last year. But they put in a wind ordinance before they even adopted with zoning, so in their zoning ordinance, they refer to the wind requirements in the wind ordinance, so it's a little unique just because of their history, but so they could have a separate wind ordinance.
Seems like maybe the developers have adopted more of a long outside, a wide setback specification. Go ahead.
Yeah, sometimes they'll self-impose their own setbacks too,
Yeah.
so.
Thanks for having the opportunity to speak. So I'm the project developer for that project you just mentioned. So Invenergy built that project. We're just about, we have 66 turbines up right now out of our 66. But yeah, so like you mentioned, Chickasaw County is unzoned. We did enter into a development agreement with Chickasaw County to include a lot of these items that John was mentioning today. I've provided a copy of that development agreement to the board of supervisors already. I can definitely provide that to the planning and zoning as well. We built that project using that development agreement and those setbacks. So, I mean, we can build another project in Floyd County using that as well. So you can use that as a basis.
What was your self-imposed setbacks on that?
Yeah.
So the non-participating property line or non-participating resident setback on that one was 1,500 feet.
From a residence?
Yep.
Okay, yeah, from non-participating.
And then
Just been residents.
right, and then the non-participating property line was 1.1 times tip height.
1.1, okay, so that's 110%.
We'll make sure that the members of the commission receive that development agreement. The board of supervisors have had it for a little while, so. That's the one that Invenergy did in Chickasaw County.
Yeah, so it's not uncommon for developers developers to just self-impose setbacks on themselves. I'm not aware of any companies that wanna be hated, where, you know what I mean, developing, they generally wanna be good neighbors, some handle it differently.
And just
yeah.
from my
Yeah.
layman's point of view, driving along, it seemed like those turbines were a lot more scattered, farther apart than, say, the wind farm in South Jefferson.
Yeah, I was playing on Google Maps this morning measuring and I was able to find some structures that were 1,100 feet from the turbine. You know, just measure that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, so, you know, like those setback, you know, so that 1,500 feet is gonna be from an occupied, quote unquote, building, or residence. So if it's like machine shed, typically, if it's different, it'd be that non-participating property line requirement. So, yeah. But yeah, it's not uncommon for them to self-impose, because developers, you know, run into varying, requirements, jurisdiction or state to state. Some states have state level regulations. Iowa does not have state level beyond, the Iowa Utilities Board. They have to go through transmission approvals through the Iowa Utilities Board.
But that doesn't have anything to do with site location.
Only somewhat, you know, like, so the developers in the room can probably tell you they'll need to locate where, transmission is appropriate. I don't think if there's no facilities, and you correct me if I'm wrong, you're not, the less far electricity has to travel without it, right? More economical, right?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely there, and then, yeah, if there's any overhead lines as well, like we would have to do state permitting with the, Iowa Utilities Board as well, so to stick to underground.
Comments?
Oh, in one of the packets that you provided earlier, there was a lot of, some focus on meteorological towers.
Yes.
Any ordinances that you've worked with in the past or seen?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, so, yeah, there is, so with wind developments, there is other types of infrastructure, so like, obviously, we're gonna address battery storage too, because that's becoming more common. I'll be honest, I'll have to learn a little bit about that myself. So I'll consult some other counties, like, I know one I've kind of identified, I want to get a copy of, is like Johnson County, for example, for battery storage. Met towers, you know, generally are fairly treated similarly, usually like to cell towers. Not sure exactly, Jeff, you might be able to help me on this one, what's your requirements for cell towers? Or is there any minimum requirements?
It's the height of the towers is our setback.
Gotcha, so the height, so it'd be like for every 1 foot of height for a tower, it needs to be 1 foot from a property line or a right of way is typical then. And then your guide, if it's a guide tower, like with guide wires, the guide wire, the anchors of those wires need to meet the setbacks of the district they're in, so the A1 district typically. So like, usually a front yard is like 50 foot from the front, so they meet district setbacks typically.
Just following up a little on your comment, then the resolution that the supervisors passed that initiated the moratorium specifically exempted metallurgical towers from the permit process, so they could be built now. And during the time, anytime, they can be applied for and constructed. They're not part of the moratorium.
Okay. Yeah, but it is common for Met towers to be included with an application for a wind farm, like at the time. Sometimes they'll build Met towers before to like measure weather conditions to see, you know, oh, is there enough wind or is this gonna be an appropriate
I
location?
would think those would be built a number of years before they ever thought of it.
Yeah, I mean, I see it both ways. In all honesty, we had it both ways at Cerro.
You know, Tom, next year, yeah, so when we're starting the project, and trying to, you know, determine how many turbines, where they should be placed, we use temporary Met towers at the beginning. There may be a couple placed throughout the project area. But when the project goes to be built, there'll be permanent ones included within the application, in association with the turbines, so they're different though.
The temporary
That
ones.
data is fed to the turbines, is that what that's used for? or something?
Yeah, help determine what's going on, you know, in the area, the permanent ones. The temporary ones are help us understand wind flows more specifically as it relates to project area.
We've allowed some time for the wind turbine companies to ask questions and make some comments. If regarding the educational materials that were provided today, if you'd like to take advantage of that, open the floor to representatives of NextEra or Invenergy at this time. Yes, I do.
I go first. Just wanted to thank you all for having us here and giving us the opportunity to speak a little bit. For future meetings and for listening sessions, we in Invenergy would be happy to provide some sort of setback presentations showing an impact of larger setbacks. It is a visual perspective, if that's something that is the board and P&Z committee would be wanting to see. Really, it's your time, and we're willing to provide and help with this process as much as we can. So if there's anything that you would like to see from us, we can definitely help try to provide that, whether it's a presentation like that or experts on a certain topic, like noise or shadow or yeah, the Eagles Nest stuff, the environmental. We have a lot of experts at Invenergy. We've done a lot of these projects, so we can provide resources to help make decisions here too. Even when we have a stake in the county, of course, but yeah, that's what I got.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just, again, thank you for this. I think this is great. This is an opportunity for everyone to sit in the room and have the conversation. We really appreciate that. It's open, it's being conducted at the public. We got nothing to hide, and we're glad to be a part of the process. I think this has been a great opportunity. Really appreciate you guys and your foresight in hiring Hog to come in and assist with this. I think that's gonna work well as also. Just from the conversation today, just a couple comments, from project constraints, whether that be setbacks and such. I didn't hear anything that was oh my goodness, that's crazy, and that'll never allow us to develop a site. I thought everything that was said was good, and just appreciate you guys listening to those comments and really having some more foresight into the setback conversation, because I think they could probably go without saying that easily walk in the room and just say, we want half-mile setbacks, 2-mile setbacks, and that would kill the project. And it's just something that we hope that that's not the position that the planning commission and the board ultimately goes. We want to be partners with the county and be able to develop a project that benefits both parties. So I think that's important. And just having some, ensuring that the boundaries and the setbacks and the constraints are not arbitrary, that there's some study or some rationale behind them is very helpful. And we have our own internal ones, just as Energy does, I'm sure, as well. And it kind of depends on the size of the turbines. So I think that percentage is a great way to go. The percent 1 point, 110% or 115 or something of that nature. I think it would be great is you got a great resource, but make the ordinance your own. There are a lot of counties, and you go to Lynn County, or you can go to Woodbury County, or you can go to these other counties that maybe have a larger staff, and they have these ordinances that are pretty detailed. And just, I hope that as you look at your ordinance and go to propose things, that you understand that there's an implementation part of it that can be very difficult. We're gonna do what we can to ensure that the project is good for everybody involved. But sometimes those ordinances can be rather onerous as you develop them. If you just cut and paste them from another county, all of a sudden you got other departments that may not be involved that are trying to figure out what the seed mix is for a large solar project, for instance. So just something to be cognizant of. I know there was some conversation in the CSR. That's a tough conversation for the developers that are trying to build projects. CSR is, I mean, it does rate the soil, but when we're trying to build projects, as Isaac said, illustrating the constraints that exist to develop a wind project, it's pretty, I think it'd be pretty shocking to everyone to understand how limited the area actually is. It's difficult to cite turbines just under the parameters, as we just spent almost an hour and 45 minutes going through the studies that we have to do and the people that we have to talk to and the agencies that we work through. It does come to be a very small portion of the project area that can be developed. So those constraints are already in existence. So it's just something to, think about. And then just the lastly is that, we want to be a part of the county. We have operation centers on Cerro Gordo, and we have other ones in the state. We just built a large training center in Des Moines. We want to be able to walk down the street as a developer with our shirts on that say NextEra, that we're not being, we're not here to cause problems and then move out and reap benefits, you might say. That's not what we're here for. We're trying to invest in the community. We sponsor events. We're a part of the Floyd County Fair this summer, and we would intend to be part of the community as we move forward. Most of our wind projects have an operation and maintenance center on site, which means we're employing people that live in the county and in the cities and are part of the organizations. So we just hope that you'll understand that we're here to be a partner, help the county. Of course, we're here to make money as well, build a project. But I think, that's like any other industry would be as well. So anyway, just appreciate those couple minutes. Hope that didn't take too long.
Thank you. Isaac, for the second time?
I just have a quick handout, for the board. And I can hand that out. It's just information on Invenergy in general, since it's the first time we really been with Lindsay. But, yeah, I mean, I'll just echo, what Tom said as well, to, a lot of that, us developers are pretty common, or pretty similar, in this area. And then we're just here on behalf of our participating landowners, so.
Is there anyone, county resident, anyone listening on the calling line or into the meeting that's Zoom that would like to ask a question or make a comment at this time? Hearing none, any member of the board, member of the commission, any final comments, thoughts?
Good working session. Got a lot to digest here, but it's a start.
I definitely would like a copy of jigsaw agreement that was.
I think those are sent already.
I just emailed it to you.
Yeah.
Already.
That's fast. Done.
Well, you're on top of things.
I appreciate the attendance and all the information that was given today. And just in stark contrast, just today I sent minimum separation distances for confined animal feeding operations to a county resident who asked, how far away do I have to be from a 1,000 animal unit, animal confinement? And I said, well, that's 1,875 feet, but there's a lot more to that. And understand that's state law. Counties don't have any impact on that. We can have something called the master matrix, so we have some input on that. But we have a task before us that we just started today, where this board the zoning commission and the board of supervisors, with the help of, all the people in attendance today, our county residents, are gonna create an amendment to our ordinance that tries to find a middle ground that allows for renewable energy projects to be built in Floyd County and protects the county residents, agricultural producers, from any negative impact. So we have a big task ahead of us. And I think we got off to a great start and look forward to continuing this work as we work together. Dean, you have anything you'd like to add to that?
I think it's been a good process that we're working together, and I see, the next agenda item is to set a joint listening session. And I guess I would encourage you, again, that joint similar form to this, and that would be the next item of business, I guess.
Sounds good to me. The supervisors are kind of available. We meet weekly, so our schedule's pretty open to that. You suggest a time, perhaps between now and the first of the year, and we'll
Yeah.
see if we can come up with something.
So one thing I would suggest, so listening sessions are gonna be kind of set asides for the public. Developers wanna make comments to things they have concerns about, want us to consider, have major support for, wind energy or, batteries. That we're gonna be in the ordinance amendment. So I recommend probably some good lead time, a couple weeks. Obviously, we're running into Christmas season. I don't know, one suggestion maybe, for this first one of this, let's see, with that December 18th, the 22nd, so then you're before Christmas, before everybody's with their families. But yeah, a few weeks to sort of advertise and get public notices out. So.
Similar location, perhaps we could work on our technology a little bit, so some of this material, as I was thinking about Ivy's remark, this presentation from the Center of Rural Affairs had a real good graphic.
Yes.
We talked about separated distances.
Yeah, that might
If we could expend, show something like that online, you could see how quickly separated distances take up the earth. So,
Yeah, and putting those materials online, those are all public, those are on the website.
But just so we could show something here.
Yeah, that too, yeah, absolutely,
What do you think about the date?
19th, that's the same training.
I was just gonna say, I'm tied up the 19th, but. that's a
22nd,
two-
surgery scheduled for that.
Which day?
Friday the 22nd.
I think I'm pretty wide open.
Would Wednesday work for that? And time of day, Mark, you think 1 o'clock's gonna be?
What do you think? That works for some people or not
Yeah,
everyone?
I mean, one, for the benefit of the public too, like, obviously, we're gonna have multiple listening sessions, varying the time of day, because a lot of people work during the day, right? So having at least 1 or 2 evening ones, I'd also recommend, so.
That's where you had people say.
I did see
it
the
needs to be
comment
at night.
on Zoom chat that there's a blade recycling facility in Fairfax. I'm gonna do some research into that. Thanks for pointing that out.
I guess
You've heard our days we can, and then Wednesday seems to be open. Guy, does that work for you?
The 20th,
Jim?
what day, what week?
22nd.
22nd is a Friday.
Well, that's Friday. Did we move to the 20th, did we?
Yeah.
Contract we have 2 or 3, but then,
We do Wednesday, the 20th. Is that amenable with everybody?
And pick a time.
Good time.
Let's do the 1 o'clock. We'll do, the first listening session, let's do at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, if that'd be on Wednesday.
Okay.
But then, yes,
I would propose that the next one be at night,
yeah, right, that's something to
whether
say.
it's 5
Yeah, the
o'clock.
first one can maybe be during an afternoon, and then I would probably say the next one we do after the first of the year, do an evening session to accommodate the public especially.
Or even, you're saying 6:37 then or something?
Yeah, something like that, like 5 to 7, something like that.
How long do you anticipate these listening sessions?
Well, it's kind of at how much interest you get, I suppose, right? I generally would
But we
recommend,
should have a cap.
2 hours maybe. So, one thing I would also recommend, so in our contract, right, we have with Nyakaga, we have 3 sessions sort of laid out in the contract, but with the flexibility of adding more if we feel like that's needed, that's at your discretion. So, right now, we could start with 1 and see how it kind of goes, I guess. And so that was Wednesday, the 20th.
Sounds,
I'm open.
that works for us.
All right. So that's a good, so, yeah, I would always recommend, let's, do a notice in the paper for sure, obviously. At least with maybe a couple weeks lead time, I can even do a draft for you if you'd like me to. I can send that to you, Gloria. Oh, you too?
Yeah.
Do you have a card?
I don't have a card,
Here,
because I'm not special enough.
Gotcha. Nope.
Could you? Well, if you send it to mine.
Yeah, can you just email me some contact info and then they'll have your contact?
I would say if you send, yes, you can each one that's on my card.
Okay.
That'll get it both of us.
Oh, yeah, oh. Are you sure?
Yes.
I'm.
Oh, okay, I haven't met you first.
Yeah, I'm Jen.
Okay, perfect, yeah. My apologies.
Oh, no, you're.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah, no, you're. Why not?
The first one is going to.
So another thing, this is at your discretion, if you wanna allow, say, developers or a member of the public that's like an interest like that, to have a set aside period of time, say give them 10 or 15 minutes, that's up to you. I will let you handle reservations or what have you. This will be the time, and then otherwise, just allow members of the public or whoever.
Time.
Yeah, I would generally recommend 5 minutes, because otherwise it's gonna get quite long.
Yeah, and we've kind of discussed some of those things already when we were talking about, that, at least the board did. That we wanted this to be open, transparent, and allow both, county residents and the developers of the limited companies to have a certain period of time that they can make these presentations as well.
Yep, and so let's put that in the public notice, but, I would probably limit it to no more than 2 or 3, just for the sake of time. We'll have multiple sessions, obviously, so there's a member of the public or whatever that wants to reserve time with you. That's obviously at your discretion as a part of the commission, but, we can put that in like the notice, if you would like me to. I don't know if we want that in the notice or just allow them to call it. Try to set aside a time at your allowance.
Yeah, we'll be generous as we think is appropriate, and to make sure everybody gets an opportunity to comment. One other thing that we are gonna do is, auditor cars taking minutes of this meeting. And, since it's kind of a joint meeting, we'll be posting those minutes within 1 week of this meeting date. And those will be posted both on the Board of Supervisors and the Planning and Zoning Commission's website. So people who want to read minutes, will have them available to them within 1 week of this meeting. And that stimulates more interest in what we're doing. Well, is there anything else, for the, on before us?
I have none.
All right,
Planning and zoning, I declare this meeting adjourned.
all right,
Declare that.
so we will do the same.
Make a motion to adjourn.
All right,
Second.
second, move and we're adjourned. Those in favor say aye.
Okay.
Aye, we're adjourned. Thank you.
Mike, if you are listening, your comment was mentioned about.
How you been?
Good, what you? Still got some critters out there?
Oh, yes. 4 of them.
Got your bugs getting yet?
Yes.
You had one of them, what that thing?
I got 2 of them, actually.
2 of them, okay.
Almost, I don't know what they call the third one. He's
They called him a Buckskin when he's bottom, but he's more of a brewer. Dorsal stripes.
Okay.
So, but he's kind of a different color.
Do you still foster pups for Achieving Freedom or?
No, haven't done that.
You didn't, I didn't think so, yeah.
Just have the therapy dogs and stuff. Last time I brought him here because I think I came from the hospital. When I came here.
Okay.
So,
This guy.
yes.
Nice to meet
Nice to meet
you.
you.
Glad, thanks for attending, and I hope it was valuable.
Should I share more? Because I've had
Sure.
turbines close to me,
Uh-huh.
and I saw the shadow flicker.
Uh-huh.
What bird is that?
Shadow, oh, yeah, yeah, it's like, that's why I was like, what is shadow flicker, you know what I mean?
And I have it
Yeah.
at my house.
Do you get a little bit at
A
your
little bit,
house?
yeah.
Okay.
It's in the morning, in the southeast of the house.
Oh, okay.
You know, the first time I go, well, what the heck's going on?
Yeah, I always
Car
kind of like
outside.
I always like to talk to property owners that are like near them, just to get their perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they replaced the blades on these Mid-American ones about 3-4 years ago.
Do they get longer?
Longer, yeah, longer. And the noise of the turbine's not so bad, but I've heard before that some of these construction workers are not very diligent about things because they lose stuff in them.
Oh,
every
so there's
time
like
they go-
someone's cell phone
No,
is turning
no,
on.
It's probably a bolt or a nut or whatever. But I hear that.
Oh, okay. Oh, you hear like a kind of thing?
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Clunk,
I've never heard of that.
clunk, clunk. Yeah, people before they did it, they said, well, different areas, but now I have one next to my house.
I might recommend is just call the developer.
Okay.
Or if you don't know how to contact them, call the county because they'll have their contact information. Just call Jeff.
Okay.
Just say, hey, we have this issue.
Yeah.
Because that can be quite annoying.
Oh, yeah.
So, 'cause,
It's
you know,
more annoying than the actual blade itself.
yeah. Is the noise? How's the noise for you?
God, I think I said last time, I got railroad tracks 2 miles away.
Oh, okay.
The ones down north is a lot worse than the turbine. half
Yeah,
a mile
if
away.
it's
Quarter mile.
downwind, that can also impact noise too, so, but anyway, I just thought I'd introduce myself. Nice to meet you, and we'll be in touch, so, but, all right, take care. Good to see you.
And we will go through that memorial service.
Okay.
And then of course we'll stay and visit with the other family members. And so
You'll be gone for a while then.
we may be gone for at least 10 days, 11 days.
Okay.
On our grandchildren, 7 and 3 years. Yeah, I'm taking them after the memorial service. We will take them to the Tiger Resort because they'll get a chance to see some wildlife.
Sure. Cool.
We'll see you in-
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We'll see you in January and have a Merry Christmas and happy Christmas.
Thank you, you too. Say hi to Carol for me.
I will. They're working on those trees on the drainage ditch.
Yeah, okay.
About half a mile.
Got this, they started on the south end, didn't they? And they're working northwest. Northeast, we're northwest, yeah.
They're probably, well, the first mile, March, no, not March, Ocean to Noble, I got that done.
Okay.
From Noble over to March, he got half of it done, one side. He goes up one side and come back.
There's a lot of them up there, right there.
Yeah. Well, there was a lot in that first mile.
Yeah, I went up Ocean, and I don't know how far north I went, but there was a bridge, a little bridge north of 14 on Ocean.
Yeah, that's where they started.
That's where they started, didn't they? And then they went.
And there you could go back and forth, you just went through the excavator. But farther north, he's going to one side and then come back down the other side.
We've got a couple bills from them.
The guy really works by himself.
Yeah.
He's getting a lot done, I think.
Is this the one we moved
I
to?
see all the smoke all the time.
Okay.
And we have a lot of eagles now. Is it in there?